This is episode 76 of the Sports Business Classroom audio experience.
Welcome to the Sports Business Classroom audio experience. I'm your host, Sergio Millis, and each week I'll bring you an inspiring person or message to help you discover how to break in and succeed in sports and life. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and let the experience begin.
Today's show is the audio from a recent webinar about how NBA teams approach the trade deadline. This webinar was hosted by Eric Pincus, a writer for Bleacher Report, salary cap strategist, and instructor for Sports Business Classroom, as well as Seth Partnow, a contributor for The Athletic and director of North American sports for StatsBomb. They discussed when teams begin the trade process, the practice of doing your homework and getting insight into all details of a trade, and the importance of intel and honesty. They also took some questions from attendees and what ended up being a very educational Q&A session. If you've ever wondered what NBA front offices are really like in the days leading up to the trade deadline, I have no doubt you will learn a lot and find this episode informative and helpful.
All right, welcome to Sports Business Classroom. I'm Eric Pincus, and I'm with Seth Partnow. And today we are going to talk about the trade deadline, more about how we got here and how it works in the NBA. Try to treat this like an educational thing. If you've missed, you haven't missed anything. We're going to kind of introduce, first of all, that Sports Business Classroom is a tremendous program. You know this. You should know this. And if you don't, come and ask me and Seth about it. There is a Q&A. We're not necessarily going to get a lot of who's going to trade who to where. We might speculate a little, Seth and I, but we're not going to necessarily dig in crazy. But I want to get your thoughts on questions about our program. I do want to say also that they have opened up early registration, which is a great opportunity to get involved for our Immersive program in Las Vegas, which is honestly my favorite week of the year. It's my favorite NBA related event and really an absolute joy. So we do have some information on that as well. But Seth, let's kind of just sort of at least talk about the obvious. I feel like we have to at least acknowledge that there was a big giant trade that just executed right before we got on. Just give me a quick thought on anything that runs across your mind, a PG version of what happened with Dallas and Brooklyn and Kyrie Irving.
Well, first of all, appreciate Hall Pass having me, and I would like to echo everything Eric said about SBC. It's been the last couple of years that I've been an instructor there. It's been a lot of fun every year. I've kept in touch with a number of students over the year, and it's always fun to kind of see how they kind of percolate through positions in the industry, whether it's with teams or the media or things like that. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways. I mean, there's the on-court aspects. The part that is a little bit surprising to me is how fast it came together. Now, we're going to talk about how when teams start talking about trades, but a player of that caliber is generally not being discussed until they are. And this is pretty quick for something to get done of this magnitude. Unless it was something that was in the works longer from well before the actual trade demand happened.
Right. Well, I think that kind of takes us right into like the calendar, because in my mind, this Kyrie conversation in some form has been going on for a long time. And, it's a team's responsibility to kind of have a plan for each possible iteration of what could happen, right? For one, Kyrie could have opted out before the season, and they discussed an extension. They discussed a new contract, and it sounds like around June, end of June, which is the time when a player has to decide on an option, June 30th-ish. It's variable, but let's say it was June 30th, July 1st, he's a free agent, right? So he opted in, but they had to have those kind of initial talks. And then boom, July 1st, KD demands out. And we get into this kind of weirdness where the Nets are taking calls for KD, but are they really, they're not necessarily trying to trade KD, but they're at least gauging the market, and in the process also getting more information about Kyrie Irving and that market. And then we get into the season where Kyrie had some issues, and I don't want to get too much into those issues. But just to say that there was a suspension and some possibility of maybe we need to go in another direction. And then there was Chris Haynes of Bleacher Report, my colleague, wrote that there were discussions of an extension last week, and then they blew up, and now we got a trade request. So I do think some of the homework along the way kind of helped, per se. I think that led to a quick resolution, but I think you're right that like a star player, usually it goes down to the deadline. There's a lot of waffling. Why do you think this went through? Was it maybe some of the groundwork that they had laid, or was it something else?
So, and this was a few things come to mind. First, this was more under kind of the previous management, but Dallas was known for kind of coming in late and trying to get deals done that way. So in that instance, it's not completely unheard of for, as an organization, Dallas to do something quickly. I think Brooklyn was motivated to do something quickly just because, you talked about all the twists and turns that has taken. And that's highly unusual in terms of the amount of sort of, as you say, you do a lot of scenario building. You do a lot of, you do cap scenarios. If this happens, if that happens, and none of these things happen with the snap of a finger, and just having to, open the furnace that you burn the old documents in every couple of weeks. Like, well, those plans are done now. Like at a certain level, it's just like getting so like, that sounds good. Let's do it. Let's be done with it. I think there's probably an element of that as well. Once they had someone who was ready to move, they were ready to move, and they weren't necessarily going to sweat the small stuff.
Right. And I'll suggest that I think the NBA world has changed in the last 2-3 years by the addition of the play-in tournament. And so in the past, you would have 8 teams in each conference make the playoffs. And at a certain point, it became pretty clear that you were out. And sometimes there might be a 9th or a 10th team that was really close. Maybe there was parity, and sometimes the gap was wider, but the delineation of buyers and sellers was more clear. Whereas if you look at the standings right now, there are in the West, I think 13 teams that are actually in range of 5 in the West, which is abnormal. It's not a usual year, but because some of those teams will get into the play-in, they still have a chance. And for some teams like the Sacramento Kings, for instance, making the playoffs means a lot to them. It's not always about necessarily winning a title every year. Only one team does that. But for the Kings to have the opportunity to make the play-in. But I do believe that because of this tournament, there are fewer sellers. And so it's harder to get talent. There are more buyers. Everyone wants to get better, but there are fewer teams willing to sell. And I think because the Nets were like, okay, we're selling a top flight point guard, and we could asterisk that as, not everyone would agree or loves Kyrie, but clearly he is a talented basketball player, right? Suddenly there is somebody available, and now all these buyers are like, they've been hungry for some team to commit to making a move. And I think that led to our resolution. When a team starts the season, now you spent some time, you worked with the Milwaukee Bucks, and you've been around the industry for a very long time. When does a team start to think trade? Okay. So, obviously we have the off season, we have the free, we're saying the team is built. We got through the summer, we got through the draft, we got through the start of the season. Now the season has started. Where's the point where a team starts to say, okay, it's time to make a change?
First of all, when did the start thinking about the roster ever stop? Maybe the week in early August when everyone goes on vacation, but even then people are probably so I think that's even though the league probably needs a deadline, whether it's the start of the season or the trade deadline, to induce people to actually make the moves. It's probably like really it's the draft and the trade deadline are kind of the inflection points, and really the draft and free agency are kind of a fuzzy thing. But the kind of the examination, the search for information, who do they have that we want? Who do we have that they like? constantly gathering background and just intel on players, who's hurt, who's coming back, who is unhappy. That's nonstop. It's nonstop, and it's everyone from the security people on the floor before games to the medical staff, investigating stuff and talking with their counterparts, to execs. A lot of it is, I worked with, we worked together in Phoenix 3 years ago. So I'll give them a call and we'll chat and we see what's what.
Right.
And there's a lot of that that goes on. So it's that sort of done well, that sort of intel gathering process is not a process that starts and stops. It's a process that is ongoing.
Right. And I hear a lot. What I hear is like, we want to see what our team looks like through 20 games. When I talk to other executives, when I talk to scouts, when I talk to whoever I'm talking to, agents, whatever, they say like, no one's really gonna, because if your team on paper, first of all, everyone loves their team on paper to an extent when the season starts. Unrealistic expectations are, self-evaluation can get iffy, and people can kind of believe sometimes maybe they're better than they are. You have some teams like the Spurs and the Rockets, who I think were clearly planning on rebuilding, but a lot of people just assume the Jazz were in that group, and they were not. So I think teams want to see, are we 15-5? Are we 10-10? Are we 5-15? And that takes you right to about Thanksgiving-ish, or maybe the first week in December. And so you also have, when players sign over the summer, most free agents can't be traded until December 15th, the ones who signed in July or whatever. And some can't be traded until January 15th. We also have the G League Showcase, which has become sort of what you would call like the winter meetings. If you like, kind of baseball has its meetings. This is where all of the, I don't want to say all, but the majority of the league, the majority of the GMs, the top executives get together in Las Vegas for a tournament. It's a G League tournament. And yes, they're scouting those prospects, but really they're there to network and to kind of, and I think that's where the foundations of what's to come kind of get set. I think we have fewer deals in December. We used to have 1 or 2 or 3 around Christmas, and then there'd be some in January. We're starting to get to a trend with this play-in tournament where there's 0 in December. There's a sparse amount in January. And then this 1 week is kind of crazy. Is that probably a fair assessment of how the league has evolved?
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think that the deals we tend to see in January, you've talked about this a lot, but deals in January are maybe not of a lot of substance. They're kind of financial deals around kind of guarantee dates and stuff like that. So I think that's I think you're accurate in saying that. But I think that is that first 20 games really kind of, call it the G League Showcase, call it January 1st, whatever you want. That first bit is still, you're getting an idea of the shape of what everyone thinks of their team and where they think they might need to improve and who on your team they might be interested in, stuff like that. And then, whether formally or not, I think that I'm not sure what every team calls it, but in the Bucks, and I know that talking with John Hollinger about this, the same thing, we had the board. And the board is not necessarily a physical object, but it is a sort of, okay, there's all these ideas. We know, we've got a spreadsheet, we've got a magnet board, we've got something on a database that has, some intel about who teams like, who teams don't like. They told us they like this guy. They told us this third team like this guy. But then you move to actual concepts. And that's, okay, we need a backup point guard, and we're maybe looking to move a big. And you talk to a team that is looking for the other way around, and it's like, we'll put that on the board. That's, in theory, that's a concept we might discuss. We'll put that on the board, kick it around in our group, and that's sort of how the marketplace, if you will, starts to get shaped. It's like this is ideas, 95% of which will never happen. Mm-hmm. Go on a board, but it's like the next level past I kind of like that guy stage, where we're actually, putting names or assets on either side of a ledger, and maybe, never to the point of this is a cap legal offer that we could execute today, but more of a fuzzy kind of idea.
Right. I obviously intel gathering is vital. Communications, relationships. You mentioned like you had someone who used to work with someone in a different location. It's rarely, I think, or maybe not rarely, but it's not, the bulk of it isn't like the general manager of one team gets on a call, like on a red phone and like has some, conversation with another GM. And it's not like, I watched the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt where they're just like dialing, it's a journey. It's a lot of innuendo, a lot of like, hey, I'm hearing this. I heard this team that, and some teams are better, I think, at the intel gathering and then the intel organization and tracking and, keeping details on what's real and what's not, because that intel is going to drive your decision. If you believe, Kyrie, for instance, if you believe he was going to opt out, then you're going to have a different approach. If you know he's going to opt in, this is in June, and that he was not going to opt out and take 7 million or something like that, that he was going to opt in and take 30 million or whatever it is that his salary is, that was never going to happen. You might have a different approach in how you approach getting a Kyrie Irving, if you know that, or if you don't. And so the intel, I think, is important. And of course there's certainly amount of lying and
never
people. Right. But I do think, it's important for, on one hand, I think fans think there's like a overarching decision-making, thoughtful, this is our message. We're controlling the narrative this way. We are, and I know there's attempts to do that. Certainly I saw a ton of attempts to control the narrative of what happened with Kyrie Irving the last 24 hours by the teams that didn't get him, right? There was a certain amount of like, oh, this was crazy. And oh yeah, they're out of their minds. And this, ask for everything and, et cetera. How much of it is actual fact? I don't know, but I want to make the point of that, there are relationships that go on over multiple years. It is a small industry. And so while there is a certain amount of obfuscation and maybe not full transparency, there's also, you don't really benefit by flat out lying to someone, maybe in a small move. I mean, what's your thought on that? Where's the honesty card?
You can shear a sheep a bunch of times. You can skin it once. And I think that it's, there's any number of analogies to that. It's, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, whatever you want to do. Like there is a certain, like you can obfuscate maybe as, you can be general, you can be non-committal, out and out lying. It's like, I'm not dealing with that bastard again. And how much that sticks, who knows? But there's certain some of that. It's harder to get a deal with someone you can't trust. You can't trust to have an honest conversation. You can't trust whoever you're talking to shop your info or shop the deal you're discussing around. It's just like, I'm not gonna. No, we're not doing that. Come to me with a cap legal offer, and we can talk. Beyond that, it's not worth it for me.
Well, I mean, that raises, and I actually see a question from Dave Glavin, I think it is. I might be missing a letter. Does the leaking of trade offers dissuade teams from doing deals with other teams in the future? I was thinking, like, while you were saying that, he typed that question in right when I was like thinking, like, man, there's so many like leaks of what was negotiated with the Nets that didn't happen. Like, it makes you think, like, well, who's the one who's leaking this? And I mean, if it's not your team and someone's leaking about you, that you just negotiated a deal and now it's all over the place, that can't be good. You know what I mean?
It can't be good, but at the same time, where's that coming from? I mean, there's also at a certain point, agents are also kept up to date. I think it's probably bad form to surprise an agent with one of their clients getting traded. So at a certain point, it's like, hey, this is on the table.
That's a good question. Can I follow that up with how much are agents a part of the process of their player being moved? Is a player being moved and their agent is blindsided, or are they a part of that conversation?
It depends. I mean, I think a lot of it, the higher the stature of the player, and frankly, the higher the stature of the agent, the more influence there is there. I mean, there is, you mentioned it, it's kind of, it's a cliche at this point. It's a relationship business. Hey, you and I both know it's not working out for my guy there. Let's see what we can do. I'm going to make some calls. Yeah, go ahead. Like I think that sort of, that kind of thing that's a good model. It's a good way of operating. Maybe a bad way of operating is when it becomes very adversarial. And, I mean, that I think we've seen, I think that's when we start to see like the shotgunning of information out there is when it's a lot of tit for tat of getting messages out, which it's kind of silly, but it happens.
There's a lot of gossip, and there's like I part of my job with Bleacher Report, which is where I do a lot of my reporting. There's an aspect of my editors want me to get as much predictive information as possible, and sort of.
Let me ask you a question. How much of your info, and I think I know the answer, so it's a leading question, but how much of the info are you coming out? You're talking to someone from the Sonics. How much of the stuff that you're getting from them, because I don't want to put a team on the spot, but how much information are you getting from them concerns something they're doing or something they heard about a third team?
Well, again, I'll say that it depends obviously on the relationship. Yeah. There are, I would say by and large, I don't talk to people about their team more often than not, but I do have some friends who are with teams who we have a very long relationship that they're more, trustworthy of understanding who I am and how I operate, and understand that I'm not going to compromise their position, that I value the relationship more than I do getting a big scoop or something like that, which, I break certain amount of news. Like in the last however long I've been doing this, I've been fortunate to have some firsts. How many people remember what I got first? You know what I mean? Like it's not really what I chase. I'd rather be accurate, and to me, the relationship building. But I would say the vast majority I talk about with teams is like, what are you hearing from other teams? And I always, have to cage that. I understand there's always some level of not, again, the best way to put it is not full transparency. But if you talk to three people, separately about a specific team. I'll use an example like Bojan Bogdanovic. The Pistons have been telling people that they really don't want to trade him. Like they feel like they want to make the playoffs next year and that they have time so they can trade him later. Now, whether they should or shouldn't, that's a whole different question. But, and again, that may be 100% a bluff. But if you talk to three different teams about that and they are all saying the same message, it's like, okay, clearly the Pistons are putting out that message. Now they may be using it as a front. They may at the last second, but I don't think right now. And of course, I'm not on the phone with people, but I don't think right now they're soliciting offers for Bojan Bogdanovic. And if they were, they would probably want the best offer possible. So they would probably want to cast a wide net, unless they've already done their research and they already know. But things change. What happened 2 months ago, what offer you might have gotten, not offer, but conversation you had 2 months ago may be stale at this point. So
absolutely,
there would be the buzz of like, hey, yeah, they're shopping. Like right now, the buzz is that the Raptors are very much shopping their guys. It doesn't mean they're going to trade their guys, but that they're seeing what's the best that they can get right now. Should they move out? Gary Trent can leave as a free agent. Fred VanVleet can leave as a free agent. In a year's time, OG can leave as a free agent. Siakam can leave as a free agent. And so they have to reinvest in these players, or they have to decide to let them go, or, and letting them walk for nothing is probably not ideal. So these are the kind of decisions. So yeah, it's a good question. And it's different with agents. Again, everyone loves to gossip. And again, some agents will talk a little bit less about their situation. I'll say this, I'll advise and consult for agents, but there's a point where when, S is going down, that at that point, I'm probably out of the loop. In the final moment. And some agents, I help them get all the way to contract when it comes to like a consult, but more often than not, when things get to the final stages, at that point, I've been giving them all the advice I'm going to give them. And, but I do, everyone loves to gossip about someone else more than their own situations. That makes sense?
Yeah, no, it's also, that's sort of currency. Like I think you put it well. There's some people, and I think the same thing operates sort of between executives. There will be people that you have a good enough relationship with that you can talk, somewhat honestly about your team and their team and it not be a thing. It's just, we have a common background and a degree of trust. So this isn't going to get blown out of the water and it's not going to get back to my GM that I said this, because obviously I'm authorized to have this conversation. And some people, it's just like, hey, what are you hearing about? What are you guys looking to do? What are you hearing about the Cavs? What are you blah, blah, blah. And I think that's probably a little more common. And frankly, you probably get, as you say, you hear the same thing about a third team from multiple different places, and it starts to sound right. You start to hear different things, and you start to wonder if they know what they want to do, or if they're just smoke screening, or the nastiest possible way, if they're kind of leak hunting. It's you tell slightly different things to different people, and then whichever one gets published, you're like, we're not talking to that bastard again because he's the one who's talking.
Well, I think there's also an echo factor that you have to be careful for, where someone heard something from one source and it was bad, and that leaked to some other team, and now they're telling you that, but really it's the same source, and then you're telling someone else, and before you know it, there's all this and it's actually it was based on nothing. I'll say that I put a lot of time into trying to. I'd rather be correct than I would be trying to just throw a bunch of stuff on the wall. But I had something that and I wrote it as a competing executive said Team X would be open to moving player Y for player Z. And then at the showcase, someone came up to me with one of those teams I have a relationship with, and he's like, that's just not true. And I said, I talked to a couple of people. He's like, you could talk to whoever you want. I'm telling you, from where we stand, we're just not open to any of that. And so, and I appreciate that. And again, he could be lying, right?
Well, the alternative is that the other team was engaging in some wish casting, and sort of, we can get this done, and we haven't decided if we wanted to yet. Right. And so then that sort of gets around. And I think that there is, you mentioned everyone loves their team at the beginning of the year. Everyone always thinks they're getting good players for second rounders, in January.
Yes. Well, that's another thing, and I do have an article I write for, of course, Sports Business Classroom as well. And one of my posts was using kind of the self-evaluation tools of are you rebuilding or restructuring? Are you trying to grow your core? Are you right at the edge of contending, or are you actually a contender? And I sort of mapped out where my perception of where each team was before the season. And now we can kind of look at where they are now. And, I thought that the Jazz were rebuilding, they're more restructuring, right? And you can see by their, they got longer contracts for Lauri Markkanen, and for Colin Sexton, and some of their deals were longer. So it tells you maybe they're not maybe where the Rockets are. So there are little elements, and we teach all that, of course, at Sports Business Classroom to, try to get, an understanding of, where the life cycle fits in. I do want to get to a couple other, we've got, questions coming in. And one of them I thought was, certainly appropriate to you, Seth. This is from James Gray saying that the panel discussion thus far, how should one think about analytics regarding personnel moves? How does the analytic element fit into the personnel decisions? So done well,
this is why you do all the intel gathering up front. You can get, if trade deadlines tomorrow, we have to decide between these three things, run the numbers and tell me what, there's some answers you can get to that. If we start to know things in November where, we can, how might this player fit in with what we do? What will we gain versus what we lose? How will the effect of replacing, say we're trading for someone who's now going to become our starting shooting guard. You don't just drop the guy in and say we add his production. It's the minutes that he is now taking from our incumbent starter. What's the difference in those minutes now? You can really start to dig in there. You can start to look at things like aging curve. You can start to really project and prognosticate draft picks, and then that leads into it's a little bit hard. The draft pick element is simply because we're a little too early in the college season for draft models to be awesome. We know something, but it's things will continue to happen as the college season plays out. that will help with that. So I think, as with anything else, it works better if it is an integrated part of an overall decision-making sort of process. I mean, the word process is overused, but if it's just used as, we have some spreadsheets and some value metrics and we compare A to B, and if A is greater than B, then we think it's good. That's not nothing, but you can do so much better if you really like put it as one element of the pipeline. And I think this is a good place to actually touch on Carol Lazo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, asking about character, team culture fit, group dynamics, stuff like that. That exists on the same sort of, think about that in the same way. Like that's what makes some of these decisions very complicated. Is okay, the player's contract is sort of denoted in one unit. The analytics are in another sort of statistical language. The character bit is very qualitative and squishy. The medical is a whole other thing that's identifying risk factors. Figuring out how to get all to synthesize all those pieces of information and decide based on the weight of all those things for all the players involved, this is something we should do or shouldn't do. It's very complicated, and it's hard, and there's no right answer to it. But it's why rushing is bad. Because if you're rushing, you haven't asked all the questions. Now, sometimes you can have too much information and get paralyzed. And frankly, that probably happens a fair amount. But that's probably a better way to miss than like to go off and just like, well, he's hit 42% of his threes this year. We need him. And then, oh, wait, he's taking 2.5 a game and he's a career 33% shooter and he's just on a hot streak. What have we done?
Yeah, no, it's, I would say it's similar to and different. I don't really function from, an analytics point of view, and I try to incorporate that intel I get from others, and I can certainly do some, but it's not my forte. My forte is understanding, the salary cap and understanding player contracts, player value. And so my homework, and obviously I don't run a front office, but how I run my little version of it to operate as a journalist and as a consultant and as an instructor is to operate as if I, was running, all 30 teams. And so to me, I really think there is some aspect of preparation that kind of matches what you're describing, where I know, at least I should know, where every team is right now in relation to the tax, in relation to the cap, who has, what players are eligible for renegotiation, which is why I was able to, steer my coverage of Miles Turner away from where we were about a year ago, which was that he's on the block, he's available, they're trying to trade him, to actually they're talking about keeping him, to they have so much money under the floor that keeping him actually makes sense. And he's the only player in the entire NBA who is eligible and is on a team that has the cap room to renegotiate him. It's sort of, it helped me color, so that when I was getting like, oh yeah, I had an article where the Clippers were interested in Miles Turner. So I wrote on that. And then as I did my research, gradually my story changed. Not that particular story, but my coverage changed over time, where the Pacers' point of view changed over time. We're like, yeah, hey, we're pretty good with Halliburton. This is a better situation. We don't like the trade offers that we're getting for our cap room, to absorb players. And this is the best move for us. But kind of doing that sort of preparation, I think is really the key. And I think that bleeds over across both of what it is that we do in our different areas of specialty. I do want to touch on, I want to hit a question.
Before you do that, can I add something, by the way?
Yes, sir.
This notion of doing the homework and knowing things, you mentioned earlier that some teams do better and do worse and know the lay of the land better. I think you'll agree, having judged kind of our practical exercise in SBC, this is one of the biggest differentiators between the teams that kind of end up doing well and the teams that don't, is the ones that have done this well. It's like, well, then we made a move because we wanted this guy and we needed a shooter. And so we traded for this guy. It's like, well, did you talk to everybody else? Did you see how much the player you traded was, or you just were done with him and you took the first offer? And I think that in that way, I think that the exercise is probably a less, certainly a lower leverage situation, but really illustrate how you can get burned by, not not running out the grounders, not doing your homework, not giving the other team a chance to make a mistake.
Yes. I'll say a couple things. Number one, the program that Seth is referring to is our mock trade deadline, which is a multi-day. It's basically runs throughout the entire immersive program in Las Vegas, and the students are assigned teams. They get to know each other and figure out who they are. You're assigned, for instance, the Nets. We'll use the Nets because they're on the news. You're the Nets. You have to make these decisions with Kyrie Irving, with KD, with everybody on your roster, both for the now and for the future. You decide, are you winning now or are you thinking about the future? And over the course of time, you're deciding what you want to do, and then you're actually negotiating with your fellow students against them or with them, collaborating or however it is that you want to operate your front office to better your team. And then you're preparing and presenting and being judged and in front of all your peers and presenting what it is that you accomplish. And it's a wonderful program. And it is like the highlight, at least, from my point of view, it's the highlight because I run that part of the program. But I know that talking to the students, they love that. And, we still talk about how years ago we were the Celtics and we acquired Kyrie Irving from the Cavs. And then Mike Zarin, who is at the time, still probably the number 2 guy in Boston, he said, "Oh, what'd you guys do?" And we told him about that. And then they made a very similar move. And of course, Mike has since assured me that we had zero impact on that. And we probably did not. However, in my heart, I believe that it's non-zero. May not be 1%, right? It may be below 1%, but I'm taking credit for 0.002. I'm fine with that. And then I want to answer also a question of, that relates to everything we just discussed about homework and getting everything, being diligent. Sam Pearson, a former student of SBC 21, he is asking about something that we stress that maybe teams aren't taking as seriously as we take them, Seth, which is the value of first round picks. How do we explain the ease with which picks are included in trades currently? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, aside from the Stepien rule, which allows you to does not allow you to be without a first round pick for 2 straight years. I think some of the trades in SBC in our practical sort of illustrate why the need to protect teams from themselves exists. But I mean, as a practical matter, they're very easy to trade. In practice, I think they've become a little harder to trade because teams have seen what can go wrong. And that's why you get these sort of very arcane, esoteric protections and pick swaps and worst of this, and it explodes into 2 seconds and stuff like that, which is a way for teams to go back and forth to chisel the last bit of value, either giving or getting in a trade. And I think a lot of that is kind of why, even if you have a concept of a deal that is this player for that player, okay, that makes sense. But to balance it, you need to throw something else in, and that's where it breaks down. Is because we need that pick can't be more than top 4 protected. No, we want a top 10 protected. That's a pretty big difference in value for if it's a team that is in range of worrying about that. So, and I think that it is likely there will be multiple deals in the next week that break down over just that topic.
Right. And one of the things that we've stressed is that you have to protect yourself. And I will, to kind of bring it to current events, tying it directly to what Dallas did in summer. One of the things that they did is they traded a future first. And I forget what their yield, what they returned was, but they traded a future first without protection. And the first basically timed with Luka's option where he could basically leave. And if he happened to leave, which he might not, but the protection was, it wasn't taking into account that things might not work out. And, they don't always work out. I will say that the real life Mavericks just traded a post Luka first unprotected, but the one that they traded is 29, and Luka's decision is around 26, 27, and he'll probably extend. Maybe he won't, but at least they'll know and have a certain amount of leeway and preparation to know okay, we don't have Luka anymore, which is obviously a big deal, or we do, as opposed to doing 27. They could have done 27. They didn't. So from if Mark Cuban and Nico Harrison got up and did their presentation, we probably would have been like, it's a little risky doing, an unprotected first. We could certainly argue the merits of a Kyrie decision. But at least we would say, I would offer, I like that the pick is, if the only path was an unprotected first, and that was the only way to get the deal done, at least you gave yourself some thought and some protection. So Sam, I will just wrap that up to say that like, the Lakers changed the market for firsts, rather for stars with AD, and the Clippers kind of hammered that point home with Kawhi and Paul George, even though it wasn't Kawhi. And over time, like we've had an inflation where it's like, if you're going to get our star player, you got to give us everything you want, that you have. And that's what happened with Donovan Mitchell. And that's what happened with Rudy Gobert. And I would like to think we're going to have a market correction at some point. Seth, do you think we will, or am I delirious and it's just going to keep...
I mean, there's not that many first round picks left to be traded after those. So I think they're by necessity. No, I don't think, and I think the Drew Holiday trade falls into that as well. Like a top 25 player, the asking price is give me all you got. And I think that's sort of an under the fact that Minnesota wanted Rudy Gobert and had more to trade from a draft standpoint had much more to do with Utah getting what they got and any sort of intrinsic value that teams place on various players. You get to a certain level of player and it's actually kind of hard to overpay in terms of draft capital. Whether current version of Rudy Gobert is that, early returns suggest probably not, but so on some level, the give me all you got because we have to trade this guy and we're going to trade him to you. So that's how it's going to work. That makes sense. But I think as the max, and the designated player extension and all these things, the super max sort of start to percolate. Well, I'm just as good as that guy, so I should get this too, or maybe you aren't. But we're gonna define it down a little bit. And I think we've probably reached past the point where it's really tenable for that to. For John Collins to be a give me all you got player. Right.
Well, I see Max Rosenberg, a former an SBC alum, who's a Knicks fan. So I'm just picking on him. But maybe the Knicks were right in not giving up everything for Donovan Mitchell. Maybe they were wrong, but maybe they give up everything they got for someone else who isn't Donovan Mitchell. So I don't think we can answer that question. But they held the line. And they were lambasted for it. So there is a kind of a no-win.
Not by me.
True.
Yeah.
Knicks fans lambasted them. And
the difference is, and I think this is very illustrative of how the value of first round picks can change. And I think the Holiday deal in particular, like from one level, it looks risky because you're giving up picks like past when Giannis is under contract for. On the other hand, you probably have the most, and I was not involved with the team at the time, so I don't know what they knew, but you can surmise that, hey, you get me what I need, and I'll sign the extension. Right. And that's largely how it played out. So what appeared initially to be risky was less so. Now, how much like New Orleans, okay, if they're willing to do this, they obviously have, there's probably not a lot of short equity in Milwaukee's picks that we're getting, so get them all.
Right.
And that's sort of the games of
projection.
The games of that we're playing here.
If you're the Pelicans and you're projecting, okay, if we do this, then they're probably going to keep Giannis for another 5 years. So the picks aren't going to be great. We got to get a ton of picks, and that goes into that equation. I get it. I want to. There are two questions that are more or less the same here. One is from CJ Martinez. The other is from Abdul
Rahman.
Okay. So how owners affect trades, and then from CJ, how involved are owners during trade discussions, especially regarding the team being in the repeater tax, long-term salary issues, et cetera. What are your thoughts?
I mean, the owner writes the checks, the governor writes the checks. And this is important because I think we're seeing a few different places where kind of bifurcated or trifurcated ownership systems situations have led to some interesting kind of dynamics. But essentially the person who is, as from the league standpoint in charge of the team gets the ultimate yay or nay because you're spending their money. Now, some owners are just tell me why you're doing this and I trust you and I'll sign off on it. And some of them need to see chapter and verse. Some of them want to actually do the negotiations themselves. We won't name names here. They might have just been active. That's part of that. That is the hardest thing for us to replicate in the program is the sort of the managing up of, well, this is a good deal and we have to convince you it's a good deal, even if everyone on Twitter is freaking out and the talking heads hate it and stuff like that.
Right. And you shouldn't anyway. You shouldn't be making a decision based on any sort of popular opinion, media pressure, anything like that. But it's a tough situation. Go ahead. Yeah,
that stuff is real. No, it is amazing how much action media reports can generate inside a team. And that's from trade. That's how your team is playing. That's who they drafted. That's who's starting, who's closing, what the rotations are. All those things can come up. So-and-so wrote this about us. Is this true? That is a real thing that happens. So if you made a stupid move and we're going to kill you for it.
I'd argue it might impact an owner more than someone who's actually in the front office. Well,
absolutely.
Depending on the quality of the front office. I'll even, throw out that literally this is several years back, but an owner of a team saw something that was aggregated in the early days of aggregation, not modern aggregation, but it was still aggregated. And it just took what I had said, just completely nonsense. It was and if this, then, they're dead in the water. But the whole thing was how it's not this. And it was, so they just took the part where I said they're dead in the water. And the owner's like, why are you saying all this? Da, 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 da. And I'm like, why are you reading this terrible aggregation? It's read what I wrote, just one extra click, read the stuff I wrote, not what someone's quoting me, which is nonsense. So, but I do think that, to get there were questions about luxury tax, repeater tax. Those are real issues for different teams. And you can sort of monitor previous behavior of teams. For instance, the Suns never went into the tax, but then they went into the tax when they kept Ayton. There are teams that are the Heat are right below and the Blazers are right below. And I don't think either team is going to add. And I could argue that the Sixers, Furkan Korkmaz requested a trade. If they make a trade that cuts a little money, they'll save they'll get an extra 16 million in kickback. I have to see how the Nets impact that number. But pre the Nets trade, it was $17 million kickback of the teams that were the teams that are over the tax pay tax. The teams that are under get a portion back. And so the Sixers make a small move. But I spoke to multiple people with the Sixers, and they were very clear that their ownership had said, they can spend to the apron tax aside. If they can't find a way to be better, give themselves a better chance to win, sure, they'll make a small move to kind of get under, but that's not their motivation. I will say that there's a lot that's written on the Lakers about repeater tax. And there's an article that just recently addressed it in a way that said it's, a progressive problem. And repeater tax is not progressive. It's flat. It's the opposite of progressive. It's not progressive, but they were very willing to go after Miles Turner at a point. They were very willing and to pay Miles Turner. They were willing to go after Kyrie. We could debate how hard they went after Kyrie with the intention of keeping him. And, for the Lakers, going into repeater isn't the issue. There are other issues, plenty that we could spend a whole webinar on. We're not going to get into that, but repeater tax matters for some situations, but it's really not a significant penalty. But progressive tax, the actual tax, certainly is. And if you go over let's go sign a player for $10 million. Well, that player costs you an extra 30, 40 million in tax. You have to ask, is this player worth $50 million? And the answer might be yes. But for the Warriors, who are the biggest spender, the answer was no when it came to Gary Payton II. And it was no for Otto Porter Jr. They had a limit as well. So I don't want to in any way suggest those things don't matter. But sometimes they can be a friendly scapegoat for people to write on and say, they're being cheap. Fine. And maybe they're being cheap in other ways. it's not always the most obvious thing. Go ahead.
Can I add one more point on the ownership thing? Sometimes there are deals that have happened that have seemingly been weird timing, and they've happened when they've happened because that's when the owner said yes.
Right.
And you want to get the deal done before they change their mind. And if you think that's a hell of a way to run a railroad, you're absolutely right. It is. But that is a reality that you take your windows when they come.
All right, I'm going to just do a couple of quick shotguns because we're running low on time. This is from, I can't quite see that. Abdus Salam Fadlu Dean. And I apologize for my terrible pronunciation. But I've heard reports about the Nets refusing to deal Kyrie to the Lakers out of spite. How common are grudges between GMs in the league leading to non-deals? I will just simply say reporters, and me being one of them, are told things by people in power. And my job is to be skeptical, but not everyone is skeptical. And sometimes they just write everything that is said to them. So sometimes there are, I'll put it this way. How many teams are actively looking to take a lesser deal? How many teams want to make a worse trade than a better trade? The answer is not zero, but pretty much close to zero. You're going to take a better trade. If something is very close, and you have a choice between someone you like and have a better relationship with and trust, and you feel like your staff is like arguing over which one to go with, then fine, go with the one that, in this case, don't go with the Lakers if it's close. It wasn't close in this particular instance. The decision made by the Nets and the Lakers wasn't based on grudges. It was based on not coming to terms on what they both felt Kyrie was worth for both teams. So yes, that exists, that kind of grudge, but it's not impacting directly anything that's not insanely close. Is that a fair statement, Seth?
For the most part, we'll go back about a decade to think of, I think one of the more famous examples. And this is one of those that it was if you remember the Knicks had traded a decent amount for Andrea Bargnani. And then the Raptors were having a tough season. This was the year they eventually traded Rudy Gay, I believe. And there was a deal that was on the table. It was like Kyle Lowry for, I might have the deals wrong. It's like Kyle Lowry for Iman Shumpert in a first rounder. And because they were so at an ownership level, New York was so unhappy about how that deal, they just didn't want to deal with the Raptors at that point. And so they said no. Now, there's probably some things we want to believe about certain people involved in that deal, but at the same time, I think that there are issues that occasionally come up. And as you say, that's probably a pretty extreme example, and there's a reason I remember it a decade later.
Right. It's not right. I don't want to suggest it's like an absolute. Nothing here is an absolute, because there are petty people who make really petty decisions. By and large, teams are not going to take a lesser deal if it, unless it's right on the border. There's really too many questions. We probably only have time for a couple of more. Is there anything else that you specifically want to hit on as far as concepts that we haven't hit, or do you want to grab a couple more questions?
I saw a good one. McCade Pearson, if I can find it, had one that I liked.
I have it here. Seth.
Yeah.
Would love your opinion here on another platform. At its base, is a trade a win-win, lose-lose, or neutral impact to the championship equity of the teams directly involved? I tend to think if you are making a trade, it's because something is wrong in some sense. You want to translate that?
So there's sort of a notion that every trade has to have a winner and a loser because it's zero sum and one team can win the championship. I think that the thing that makes that less true is the fact that teams are on different timelines, where I give you something of value tomorrow for something today. That can be win-win. That could, making this deal could help your draft pick, which helps you get Victor Wembanyama, and you also get a good player. So in 3 years, you'll be better for having made this trade. Meanwhile, I have a better chance of winning this title today. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. And I think that's why, frankly, we were worried about this year being kind of a locked up trade market because of the parity, is because there isn't that sort of difference of opinion. And that would lead to more trades having to be, what we call challenge trades. I think my player evaluation is better than yours, and so I think you think that guy is better than you do, so I'm going to trade for him. And those, like, that's a little riskier because you can look dumb pretty easily if you make a that explicit a bet on one player being better than the other. If you make a bet that's saying, like, I think D'Angelo Russell is going to be better for the next couple of years than Andrew Wiggins, and there was a clear winner and a clear loser in that trade, which is why I think part of why you don't really see that kind of trade that much.
Right. I want to address what Rohan asks, which I think is an interesting question, because most people don't start in the industry as the general manager or assistant general manager or owner of the team. Most start at the bottomish and work their way up. So what roles do the most junior front office members have in trade negotiations and free agency, regarding like salary cap analysts, and we can expand that to be other kind of analysts, might be, analytics, it might be other aspects. What are your thoughts?
I think there's a little bit of a time element to that. There are times in the year where it's like, we're in a big room, we're going to talk about it, everyone's opinion is valid, and we're going to work through some stuff. And then there's other time where, as a junior person, your job is mostly to observe and prepare peripheral materials and kind of collate scouting reports and do analytics reports and put together decision decks and things like that. So I think that, the more we are in sort of a free ranging part, the bigger that role tends to be. And then as we get kind of down towards the business end, kind of the circle of people who are generally like really active in it kind of shrinks. Now, whether or not that means that, it moves to a different room in the building and there are closed doors and fewer people in the conversation, or there's just people that are there to, take notes and pass out handouts and kind of learn how these things happen and listen on just listening in on frankly on kind of the discussions that happen between an exec, like a GM and an AGM from another team, is pretty educational, because you learn a lot about how different teams operate.
Right. And they do operate differently. Some opportunities for, one team may be very inclusive and some teams may not be at all. And I do know that, one executive is a very interactive question asker of his staff. You never get anything back. There's no two-way feedback, but it's like, what do you think about, and they listen and they notate it and they think, and you have no idea if you even blipped on their radar, and, you never get what they're thinking. And then I would say that also sometimes, and it's different, but some front offices, it's really one person who really knows what they're thinking and planning. And there's a lot of junior folk, all the way from, when I say junior, some of them may be like high level junior, like an assistant GM to a GM who may not even really know what the GM's actually doing other than what they've been involved with and don't know the plan. So it varies widely. I want to go to Tony Schwartz, who asks, generally we're talking about like our board of the board that you mentioned, as far as like making a list of what you're trying to do and what's out there. He's always been interested, Tony, on how far teams are strategizing into the future. Obviously, you hear about front offices targeting certain builds to take advantage of unrestricted free agency or RFAs, restricted free agency. But is there any strategy like that relating to the deadline or to deadlines? And I'll start that to say that, like, again, everything is relative and situational. Someone who signs like a Presti out of Oklahoma City, there was sort of an understanding that this was a multi-year situation, and the ownership was as such that they believe in Sam enough to give him that. Not everyone has that. Most don't, in fact. So if you say, well, this is going to be a 5-year project, you're probably not going to be around in 5 years to get to that. And that, like, I think like a Masai in Bobby Webster in Toronto, if they decide to blow it up in some fashion, I think they have that kind of cachet in Toronto to survive that and to say this is like a 2, 3, 4, or 5 year plan. Chicago, maybe, I don't know their situation, but maybe they don't have that same latitude because Arturis is a relatively new executive, and to sort of say everything that we've done the last 2, 3 years didn't work, let's blow it up. sort of as an indictment of the work he's done. And I'm not criticizing the Bulls. I'm saying that path for them might be harder than, say, the Raptors. And as far as the calendar, like you kind of have to have a plan for next summer with your own players who are going to be free agents. And if you're a team that's going to have spending power, you need to know who is available potentially, what the market is. And you can kind of project 2 years. Right now, it's harder to do that because we don't have a CBA. We'll have a new CBA at some point, hopefully, before July, well before July. But you don't know that far in the future. So, like loosely, some teams will sort of identify Luka and when he will be a free agent. Will he leave? He'll probably take a supermax and stay, but they might time their assets. Not even talking players. We're talking picks. We're talking cap space to that. But we'll bail on it, years ahead of time when they realize it's a sucker bet because they're probably not going to get him. One team's going to get him. It's probably Dallas. It's probably not going to be you. But those sort of things do play into the equation. Am I missing anything there?
No, I think, the idea that teams are making, 3-dimensional, 9-dimensional chess to make 6 moves to pull off the perfect combination to trade for, a top 3 player in 5 years. That's a little far-fetched. I think that there are teams that are good about looking strategically and saying, all right, it's probably bad for all of our contracts to run out at the same time. It's probably bad for us to never have any salaries to trade. So how can we structure things so that, while at the same time not encumbering ourselves too much, okay, we got a guy who makes about the mid-level next year. We have an expiring contract to trade, hopefully attached to a guy who's not just dead, not dead weight on our team. But we have that option. And I think some teams have been smart with the use of team options to kind of create almost a 3-window optionality for that. In terms of this guy is he's an expiring contract for almost 2 full years in effect. So if we need that for salary to go do something else, we have the ability to do that without necessarily completely muddying our books up. So I think there are teams that are better at, not just, okay, we want this window to go after this player, but at any given time being ready to take advantage of opportunities.
Right. I'll use the Clippers as an example. In the last year or two, they were positioned as such that they didn't need to make a move, and they had the means because of their planning and the willingness, an owner who was willing to add salary. So when the time came to get Norman Powell and Robert Covington for basically nothing, it was easy for them to do. They were prepared for it, and they're not trying to fix their situation. They're not desperate. They're just sitting around waiting for someone else to screw up. And this particular year, they actually have a little bit more where there are more clear needs where they have a pretty sizable hole behind Zubats at center, and the John Wall experiment hasn't really worked out, and Reggie Jackson hasn't had a great year. And so they kind of need to improve at point guard and backup center. And so they're in a different place when it comes to negotiations. So even the teams that maybe, put more effort into their intel and they have a big infrastructure, they're very prepared, but they're also have a slightly worse leverage position maybe than they did a year ago. So it's not always the character or the style of a team. Sometimes it's just situation. And sometimes there are people who don't do their homework, who luck into the right moves. And there are people who do their homework and destroy themselves for many, many years. It's a wide range. It's not always a merit answer there. I wanted to take a quick one here, which I thought was interesting from Charles, and it's probably a quick question, but why is it that GMs have such a wide range in valuation on 2nd round picks? What are your thoughts on seconds and how they factor into this?
There's 2 ways you can. There's 2 good, 1 bad ways you can view 2nd rounders, and I think it's the bad way is becoming less common, and that's they're at best, they're at worst a nuisance and at best a cash cow. Like we don't see as many straight up money deals for second rounders anymore. There's some GMs who view them largely as, okay, we need a sweetener. We need something to attach to it. We need something of value to go make this minor trade. And an extra second rounder or three is never goes amiss, just in case you need to, because it's not something you don't really care about it, but it's something. And some GMs are very, you know what, we like the chase of trying to identify, unearth the guy in the second round who's going to be a starter for us. And, we trust in our evaluation process and our player development, and we're interested in investing in that. And so we value them because we think not every second rounder is going to hit. I mean, if you look at from a statistical standpoint, it's less than 1 in 5 second round players turn out to be like actual NBA players, like with long rotation careers. So it's, you're hoping to hit the one guy in 10, one guy in 8, but you think your chances are more like, 1 in 6 because you're good at these things. Right. And you're invested in these things. That's as much. That's an organizational mindset as much as it is just like what the GM wants to do. Because being good at player development, being good at scouting is not one person saying we are going to develop players. It's I'm going to hire people and empower them. I'm going to send my scouts to places. I'm going to trust their opinions. I'm going to get multiple views on every player, and we're going to identify talent better. It's not going to be perfect, but we're going to do better than the next guy.
Right, and it's also situational where, I spoke to one team where they didn't have a lot of seconds and they made some trades, and then they ended up with so many seconds over time that like they couldn't possibly field a team. They can't keep them. Right. So now they've got disposable. There are, picks where if you want to protect a first, seconds are valuable there. So you might need seconds, and they're maybe not that important. To me, they're disposable. I'm buying and selling seconds as sort of like, I want to get as many as I can so that I can also get rid of as many as I can. And then some teams are really good at scouting, and they're better than others at finding those kind of players. And again, it's always hit and miss. And then some teams are, you have a veteran team that's top heavy. They've got 3 or 4 guys who are getting most of the money, and they don't really have the means to flesh out the team. So, they're going to look for 22, like seniorish, kind of like more NBA ready to just fill minutes. And it's a matter of point of view, right? Like some people might think that's a terrible idea. Some people love it.
I mean, the NBA ready guy, especially the second rounder, is kind of a myth. It doesn't stop. That doesn't mean teams don't operate that way.
Well, this is a point I want to throw at you. There's an ego aspect that, and I don't. I'm even talking even about your ego, where and not in a negative way. Like you have a healthy ego where like you're confident in what you've done in your career and your decision making, and you apply your intelligence and ego into the analysis of things. And I feel like one thing that I've grown and learned how to do is to take out how I see the world out of my analysis of how other teams and other parties, be it agents, whatever, how they operate. And I'm not picking on you at all. I'm just saying we have to kind of pull our ego out of like, this team operates this way. They make these kind of decisions, good or bad or whatever, but like they don't value what this team values. And so for me, the part of the job has been to take away my own, like, this is how I view things, and sort of take out my ego and sort of just like put myself in the ego of someone else who operates a certain kind of way based on their track record. Obviously you can't mimic a person perfectly, but you can kind of go ahead.
I think if I can put a point on that, I think the kind of the online discussion very much tends to take a championship or bust viewpoint. And that like values of players is very different if you're championship or bust versus if you think, hey, if we're a 52-win team and make the second round every year and maybe, some things break right and make the conference finals. Like, I think that's a perfectly valid way to operate a team. Certainly if you're from a business standpoint, it probably is. So, and just knowing that one team is operating in, the Clippers are championship or bust every year. So they operate a certain way. The Warriors right now are championship or bust every year. I think it's fair to say the Kings probably have some value in just making the playoffs. And I think some of the moves that they have made reflect that. And if you take those moves, like the Halliburton for Sabonis move in particular, if you take that move on the basis of the kind of their values, it's been tremendously successful, even if you might argue that Halliburton had a higher ceiling as a championship level player than Domantas Sabonis.
Yeah, and absolutely. And for students who are looking to work in the industry, you're probably a fan of some team from childhood, from birth, perhaps, right? Like if you're born in Boston, you're a Celtics fan, God help you. And it is what it is, right? So I'm teasing. But the point is that your odds of getting hired, and if you're going to limit yourself to working only for the Celtics in this example, is not a great career decision, because the odds of getting in are very challenging for anybody. Just there's only 30 teams, period. So it's a difficult road to begin with.
You can't be a fan if you're going to do this. If you're going to do this job, you can't be a fan. First of all,
how do you take that away? How do you separate that? How do you take that?
Well, first of all, like, this job will kill it dead. Like but you can't come in as a fan. I think honestly, if I ran a team, I would think long and hard about having a hard and fast rule that I'm never hiring anyone, especially for their first job, who is a fan of this team. I would think long and hard about doing that, just because I want your objectivity. Right. And like, fan is short for fanatic, which implies irrationality, which, we all exist on the internet and we see how that works. And so that is like, you have to get past that. And it is, like, working for a team is cool, but it's still also a job that you have to do to the best of your abilities. And if you become a fan of a player and that clouds your judgment about whether it's to acquire, whether it's trade away, not trade away, whether to re-sign, whether to cut, you are doing your job worse. And, right. I don't recommend that.
Right. And then there's an aspect of it where, you have to, in life in general, like you have to make, outside of sports, like you have to make the best decision based on the best decision, and you can't let a bias get in the way. It can be hard. And I'll just throw out that owners are, they're fans too. And like, I learned that pretty early on, like people in organizations, front offices, they do have some pettinesses and some childishnesses, and, it depends. It's little for some, it's huge for others. What I want to do, obviously, Seth, you're one of our, great instructors, and you really help educate on the scouting video analytics, specifically analytics side of the equation. I'm on the salary cap side, and of course that's my favorite. We also have Bo Estes, who's does media and broadcast, but I want to make sure that we let all of our students know, and everyone who's listening, potential students, that we do have early registration open. So let's bring that slide up. If you want to sign up for Sports Business Classroom, just go to www.sportsbusinessclassroom.com. I mean, this is a must if you are interested in getting into the business of basketball, participating in this program. It is the best. And I can't even, and I'm not trying to sell. Like, I legit love doing this. It is really, we had Jerry West up, he's in the photo. He spoke with our students for like an hour, and then afterwards stayed almost another hour just taking pictures and talking to people. You're not going to get that kind of access anywhere. And I'm not going to promise Jerry West next year, but it's been Adam Silver, it's been Mark Cuban, it's been everybody. So what I want to recommend is you sign up, just get on the early entry list, just check it out, reach out to myself, reach out to Seth, reach out to anybody in the program, Larry Kuhn, Bo Estes, Dave DeFore, who's, wonderful, and a former student who's running one of our programs as well. So, and if I've left anybody out, my apologies. We have so many great people who we work with, but it's a great first step into the industry. We actually have placed so many people. We have GMs of G League teams. We have people who are with the Celtics, with the Spurs, with the Thunder, you just go through it, with the Clippers. It's hard to find a team we don't have somebody who has started with our program. And it for us, that's really the joy of it, is getting people placed in positions and helping them get started. So if you're interested, please reach out. It is truly, the joy of the year that I can't stress it enough. It is www.sportsbusinessclassroom.com/early-interest. And I want to thank everyone for joining. I hope that maybe you learned something today. Maybe you didn't. If you don't agree, please reach out to either of us on Twitter. I'm sure that we will be happy to argue with you in our mentions. Is that fair, Seth? Any last words?
That's just the last thing I'd add is that, we talk about the business of basketball. The business of basketball is much bigger than just an NBA team. And we have placed students on college coaching staffs, in media organizations, in agencies, all over the place. There's a lot you can do in the world of basketball as a profession. And we try to give you an exposure to as much of it as possible.
Absolutely. I apologize for those there were a lot of good Q&A questions. Time crept on, and there's some former students. Hit us up on the Discord. You know where to find us if we didn't answer your question. If we didn't get to your question, hit me up on Twitter at Eric Pincus. Seth, is it at Seth Partnow?
At Seth Partnow, and my DMs are open if you would like to drop a question in there from this webinar or ask a question about us, SBC.
All right. Well, thank you for attending. Please check out the early interest site, www.sportsbusinessclassroom.com. And I'm going to sign off. Thank you.
There you have it, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this audio from How NBA Teams Approach the Trade Deadline webinar. You can find show notes at sportsbusinessclassroom.com/podcast. And if you listened and enjoyed this episode, let us know your thoughts and any questions you might have by tagging us at Sports Business Class on Twitter or at Sports Business Classroom on Instagram. Big thanks to our sponsors, Sports Business Classroom and Hall Pass Media, and thanks again for listening. We will see you here next time on the Sports Business Classroom audio experience.